Hi, I'm Warren from Contemporary Mystics, and welcome to my weekly platform to explore spiritual insights that I've discovered from the mystic, contemplative, and wisdom traditions that I trust will enrich your own experience of divine consciousness. There's a story about a woman named Lulu Lakatos who posed as a gemologist and pulled off the largest act of shoplifting in British history, worth £4.2 million. Lulu had arranged with the store's manager to inspect 7 diamond rings, and after diverting his attention, she placed the bag containing the rings into her handbag. Another staff member saw this and challenged her, and with a very clever sleight of hand, Lulu presented a replica bag. It wasn't until the next day the staff realized they had been swindled. When they opened the bag that was meant to contain the 7 diamond rings, to their horror, they discovered 7 pebbles of a similar size instead. Today, we're looking at the self that we most commonly identify with. This self thinks it's a precious diamond when it's really only a common pebble in comparison. Alan Watts, the prolific English writer and speaker, once said, "Waking up to who you are requires letting go of who you imagine yourself to be." The self we imagine we are is what the mystics call the false self, our separate, superficial self that's a natural result of the birth of our self-consciousness, where we forgot who we truly are, our transcendent self, and instead became preoccupied with developing this false temporal and external self. This self is also called the small self because it's a limited idea of who we think we are. It's entirely an ego and cultural construct that we've created in our earthly life and will die at the end of our human experience, whereby our true self lives forever. To the mystics, the false self doesn't exist because it's impossible to exist outside of divine consciousness and presence. To them, this self is a complete illusion, an imposter. There is no such self. The challenge for us is that we're not too good at recognizing illusions. We've spent so much of our life developing this ego self with its many disguises, costumes, and masks that we can't imagine it's not the real us. This small self lives from the outside in and so becomes easy prey to the external messages of our culture, how we look, what education and job we have, how much money we have, what vehicle we drive, what neighborhood we live in, how successful we are, and on these messages go. And when our small self doesn't measure up to these messages, it's like feeling inadequate, unfulfilled, and even worthless. It's not that the small self is inherently bad. It's just incomplete, a substitute, an imitation. Like costume jewelry, it may look real, but next to the real thing, it's not real at all. The small self simply can't comprehend divine consciousness. It doesn't have a divine center, and when faced with contradictions, it can't draw from the unlimited abundance of divine grace and must use its own limited and partial resources. Jesus clearly taught us that we must lose ourselves to find ourselves. So letting go of our false self will always feel like a threat, a loss, and even an ego death. And of course, our small self will resist this death at any cost. Yet it's only in letting go of our small self that we truly emerge as our enlarged true self. And in fact, once we embrace our true self, we realize that in letting go, we've lost nothing at all. And we gain an inner spaciousness, liberation, contentment, wholeness, and fullness that we did not previously know. That's why we need a transformation of consciousness, where we experience the transformation from being two to becoming one. This inner realignment of ourselves is, of course, a lifelong tug of war that we each must engage in, where our false self must decrease so our true self can increase and truly and fully live. I've learnt that the temporal self can be used as a divine teaching instrument if we're willing to learn. Whenever we find ourselves feeling offended, reactive, or needing to be right, this is an immediate telltale sign that we are operating from our small self, because the true self never gets offended, isn't reactive, and doesn't need to be right. And so instead of reacting from our false self, we can choose to respond out of our true divine center, our true self. In this way, the small ego self's reaction directs us back towards responding from our larger transcendent self. Every time we choose to love, we are letting go or denying our small autonomous self and choosing our God self, which is always loving because God is love. And in this way, the finite and the infinite are reconciled into one. And that's why cultivating a regular meditative practice is an absolute essential for the spiritual life, because we learn during the practice the motion of letting go and sensing our inner I amness, and we can bring this reality, this feeling awareness, increasingly back into our everyday lives and relationships. Thanks for tuning in today. Let me know how this resonated with you, and until next time, have a truly inspired week.